Kia ora everybody. New Zealand has a proud history of apprenticeships. So many of our tradies did their jobs through an apprenticeship, got their jobs through an apprenticeship, learned their craft through an apprenticeship, and many of those same people want to help the next generation of apprentices. They've made it really clear to us they just want a bit of extra support so that they can take on an apprentice, they can keep them in their apprenticeship, and they can help them finish it. That's what today's announcement has really been all about. What we've heard from a lot of our apprentices, from a lot of our tradespeople, is they're often small business people. They want to take on apprentices, they want to keep the apprentices in the job, but taking on an apprentice and having to cover the full cost of that is actually a bit of a hurdle for a lot of those tradies. So they want to do their bit because they themselves were once apprentices, they want to contribute to that proud history of apprenticeships, but they just need a bit of extra support to be able to do that. So by giving them $500 a month, we can get those apprentices into those jobs and we can keep them there.
How did you come up with the...
Labor's always been about working people and providing opportunities for working people. As you will have seen from my speech, that was a flavour of the speech all the way from start to finish. And so this is a policy that illustrates our commitment to that.
If you were to compare it to National's key safer policy, for example, last year, sort of dominated the news feed at one point, do you think that people will still be talking about Apprenticeship Boost on Friday?
We should be talking about Apprenticeship Boosts all the way to the election. Labor's got a proud history of supporting apprenticeships. National's got a pretty woeful history of cutting support for apprentices.
How did you come up with the two-year figure?
When we talked to employers, when we first introduced the Apprenticeship Boost and subsequent to the cuts the current government have made, we know that there's a real hurdle between getting through that first year and continuing on into the second year, that a lot of apprentices drop out of the system during. Shannon can probably give you the numbers. I think it's something up to a third of apprentices drop out between the first and second years. So providing that extra support so that we get them through the first 2 years means that they're more likely to complete their apprenticeships. Again, tradies have been pretty clear with me in the conversations I've had with them that it's that first 2 years that's pretty critical. Once you get past the first 2 years, many of those people, while they might not yet be fully qualified, are actually contributing much, much more to the jobs than they are in those first 2 years.
You've brought back essentially the last Labor government's apprenticeship scheme. Why, or could you expect to see, bringing back fees free?
Every Labor government has expanded apprenticeship opportunities. From Helen Clark's government, who introduced what were then called modern apprenticeships, which is the current form of apprenticeship that we have, after the previous national government had abolished apprenticeships altogether, through to our government that first introduced the Apprenticeship Boost, which was subsequently cut by National, to our next government who will support the Apprenticeship Boost and expand the Apprenticeship Boost. Labor has always been the party of apprenticeships. New Zealand's got a proud history of apprenticeships and we want to back that.
Did you consider putting a cap on the size of the company that could claim this subsidy so it doesn't go to some of the large construction users?
No, because ultimately we want to get as many people into apprenticeships as we can. So this is about making sure that young people have the opportunity to learn a trade, to learn new skills, at a time when we've got 100,000 young New Zealanders who are not engaged in any form of education, employment or training. Frankly, I want to grab every opportunity for them that I possibly can.
The risk is that these large firms come here, they don't pay a lot of tax here because their profits are registered overseas, and now you're going to give them, a slice of $70 million a year of subsidies to take on staff they can probably afford to train anyway.
I would rather those big overseas companies who are coming to New Zealand to do work in New Zealand take on young New Zealanders rather than import the workforce that they rely on to do the jobs that they're given.
To be honest, question, does this policy actually incentivise young people to take on those apprenticeships? And do we currently have enough people wanting to take on the apprenticeships?
There are so many young New Zealanders who would love to get into the trades and are just desperate for the opportunity to do that. And we've got a lot of feedback from those employers who would love to take on an apprentice, that they just need a bit more financial support to be able to do that. Cost has certainly been a big barrier for employers being willing to take on more apprentices.
The number of young people entering trades is declining though, so how do you know that there are young people who do want to enter trades?
one of the reasons it's declining is that there have been fewer jobs in the trades. So if you take construction, there's 20,000 fewer jobs in construction, or there have been up to 20,000 fewer jobs in construction than there were on election day, last election. And that's in part because of the decisions this current government have taken to pause, cancel and delay so many building projects. We want to get New Zealand building again, and we want to get New Zealand back to work.
What was your thinking?
In 2023, it cost a this of $420 million over 4 years to keep the apprenticeship boost scheme permanent. This time around, it's looking at about $226 million over 4 years. Why is it so much cheaper this time around compared to the policy last time?
A series of reasons. One is there is already some funding in the system for it, so there is still a limited apprenticeship boost in place, so that offsets the cost. There are fewer people doing apprenticeships now than there were under a Labor government, in large part because the current government managed to tank the construction industry, and then we're not extending it to the full range of apprenticeships that the original scheme covered. Different time, different context, different need. We've been more targeted in the approach we've taken here.
What was your thinking to expand this policy out to more industries?
Well, if you look at the industries that we've expanded it to, we've expanded it to more industries that employ more women, because one of the things is when National narrowed down the scope of it, they excluded the vast majority of the professions that include women in apprenticeships, and we didn't want to see that continue. But we've also expanded it into areas where we've got a lot of work as a country that we need to get done. So areas like road building and like water infrastructure that were excluded from additional apprenticeship support by National, we're putting them back in because everybody can see there's a lot of work that needs to be done in roading and a lot of work that needs to be done in water.
The government at the budget announced funding for increased places at trade academies. Would Labor maintain that funding, and do you see that as sort of sitting alongside the scheme here?
Trades academies play a really useful role, and I think there's a lot more that we can do in our secondary schools, in addition to trades academies, to provide young people with those opportunities to learn those practical skills. I'm concerned that Erica Stanford's work there is actually de-emphasising practical skills, including areas like agriculture, which are huge for New Zealand. They've been really kind of made second rate and second class in her review of the school curriculum, and that's just wrong.
Back to the next point about fees free. Is this policy just sort of signalling that Labor's moving away from that fees free scheme and favouring?
This is our policy on apprenticeships. We've got plenty more work underway around tertiary education. There'll be more policy in the tertiary education area. This is our policy on apprenticeships.
Fees free off the table now.
Oh, look, this is our policy on apprenticeships. We'll set out other tertiary education policies as we go along. There's plenty of policies still to come from Labor in this election campaign.
Are you actively considering fees free?
Look, we'll set out our broader tertiary education policies, including tertiary student support for those who are doing provider-based education in due course. We're not doing that today.
Okay, so fees free for provider-based students, not so much the old scheme is probably where you're looking to.
I'm not going to say what's on and off the table in terms of policies that we may or may not be considering. Happy to answer questions on the policies we have announced.
Mentioned the simplicity of the tagline today when you mentioned policies is how you going to pay for it, and particularly focusing on pay equity promises. We didn't get any answers to that this weekend. When are we going to?
On pay equity in due course. This is going to be paid for out of future budget allowances. I noticed the National Party's major policy announcement around KiwiSaver, which is a lot more expensive than this one, they're proposing to pay out of future budget allowances, so they've got a leg to stand on.
Do you think you're vulnerable to that one?
No.
Barbara Edmonds said yesterday that when she produces the fiscal plan, everything will add up. How are you going to make it add up when you've got this massive pay equity thing lurking in the background?
Well, you will see.
Well, but how?
Well, look,
You've only got two choices. Either you cut something or you increase taxation.
the National Party would love to peddle the line that Labor's numbers don't add up because their numbers don't add up. The National Party still haven't said how they're going to fund about $60 billion worth of roads, which is the biggest fiscal hole I think any government has gone into an election campaign facing, and they're making no effort to explain to New Zealanders how they're going to fill it.
The Ministry of Transport in 2023 did cost your roading program $59 billion, of which $2 billion was funded.
Yeah, we'll set out our own transport policy in due course, Thomas.
So the problem is that, unfunding roads is kind of a bipartisan commitment at this stage, isn't it?
We'll set out our own transport policies in due course.
Are you planning to try and produce some sort of independent costings of reinstating pay equity? Because you've obviously taken issue with the Treasury's numbers. How would you actually do
Oh, look, as I've said before, when we set out our pay equity policy, I'm happy to answer questions on it.
It was kind of surprising, though, that Carmel Sepuloni's speech yesterday was mainly focused on pay equity. It's been such an important topic for Labor, but there's no commitment to funding it.
Carmel Sepuloni was setting out that we're not going to balance our books by basically saying to women they should accept less pay than men for work of the same value.
What's the time frame on the pay equity announcement?
In due course.
Months, weeks?
You don't have any other questions on the policy I've just announced, Thomas? You've been complaining that we haven't been announcing policies. Now we're announcing them and you want to talk about ones we haven't announced yet.
Can I ask if you revealed that Jenny Anderson knew about the Richard Chambers complaint? Are you confident that she handled that appropriately?
Yes, absolutely. She did absolutely the right thing. She passed it on to the Office of the Minister of Police and sought assurance from the Office of the Minister of Police that it was going to be handled appropriately and that they were going to hand it on to the people who could investigate it appropriately, and did nothing else with it. And I think that's absolutely the appropriate course of action for her to have taken. Look, the IPCA need to investigate that. I'm not going to make any comment on that while the IPCA are doing their investigation. I think Ginny Anderson has handled this absolutely appropriately.
Appropriate for Chambers to stay in that role while the investigation takes place?
Those are ultimately questions for the current Minister of Police and for the IPCA.
In the 2023 Congress, you also focused on the apprenticeship boost. Why is this your election year kickstart policy each time?
Labor is the party of workers. Apprenticeships are a really important way of how we get people into the trades. We see huge career opportunities for young New Zealanders moving into the trades, and we're really proud of what we achieved in government in that area, record numbers of people in apprenticeships, and we want to get apprenticeships growing again.
What's your vibe check after this weekend? What kind of flavour have you picked up from the party faithful?
Really good. Everybody is absolutely committed and resolved to winning this year's election. They went to great lengths to get here after a lot of travel disruption, and I think that shows the level of commitment of our volunteers and supporters.
A lot of the audience, the Wellington-based audience, was keen to see an end to the cuts, public service cuts. Are you going to announce what your plan is for the $2.1 billion worth of baked-in cuts for the subsequent budget?
We'll set out our own public service policies, and that will include how we make public services more effective, more efficient, deliver better value for money for New Zealanders from their public services, and of course we'll set out the financial implications of all that as well.
Will you, if elected, I mean those cuts are sort of in train, letters are starting to go out, will you issue a sort of stop work or something, after November if you're elected to stop those cuts from taking place?
Oh, we've got to focus on winning an election first, Thomas.
But, so it seems unlikely that you would cut public services.
Oh.
You're not saying that you're not going to cut.
When we set out our fiscal plan, we'll obviously set out a different set of priorities to this government.
I might have missed it, but I didn't see any sign of Rakesh Naidu. Do you know where he's at in terms of police with working through the appointment process?
He's still overseas, so I imagine when he's back in the country, we'll be able to, answer questions on that.
Can you put a date on when we might start seeing some of these costings and some of these specifics? I mean, 3 months, isn't it, before you open your campaign?
Well, I'm absolutely confident I can do better than Nicola Willis.
But how about a date?
Well, it'll be earlier than Nicola Willis released hers.
The AMP Party's just announced policies around tightening up benefits, medical certs and things like that, as well as the proposal, again, to shrink the executive. Do you have any thoughts on whether the executive should be shrunk, and I guess also
Well, David Seymour doesn't practice what he preaches, does he? I mean, he expanded the number of government departments, he expanded the number of ministerial portfolios in his coalition negotiations. He doesn't live up to the hype that he puts out there before the election. As for his welfare policies, it's just rehash of failed old ideas from the past.
Would you repeal move-on orders?
We'll set out our own position on move-on orders. We don't want to see homeless people being criminalised. So we'll set out our own policies around how we deal with homelessness. It is a real issue, but you don't deal with the issues of homelessness by criminalising the homeless.
it should be pretty easy for you to say yes or no.
Oh, look, we'll set that out in due course.
Winston Peters has said again he won't work with you or Labor, like you said.
Winston Peters can say whatever he likes. He's making it very clear that if you vote for him, you're voting for Christopher Luxon to still be Prime Minister.
He's a big fan of apprenticeship boost, huh? He's the one that probably kept it going when National wanted to cut it.
Well, look, what Winston Peters says and what Winston Peters does don't always tally up.
In her speech yesterday, Jill Day said campaign with kindness. Is this going to be a kind campaign?
It's going to be a robust campaign. But I certainly hope that there can be some kindness and some compassion in it. I think this is a government that's been totally lacking in both.
There was a lot of emphasis about Māori culture at the start of this day. Does it feel awkward, the fact that ACT have a Māori deputy leader and a leader now for Labour?
No, we just had a deputy leader. Kelvin Davis was previously our deputy leader for a long time, very, very successful in the job. I'm really proud of Labour's Māori team, and if you look at the lineup of Māori candidates standing for Labour at this year's election, they are formidable.
Have we covered how many people do you think are actually going to get an apprenticeship now because of this?
Well, we estimate, and the costings of this we've estimated it could support up to 27,000 people. That's not a target. That's an estimate of what we think could happen based on current participation rates and increasing those. Yeah, by 2030.
I get that it's in Labour's constitution to hold the election year Congress in Wellington, but this is not the first time the weather has disrupted things. Is it maybe time to host it somewhere nicer?
We normally do our election year Congress in Wellington, and then we do our campaign launch in Auckland. So we've got a bit of a formula, a bit of a rhythm to these things that works pretty well for us. But you can't stop holding events in Wellington just because of the weather. And we're going to have to get used to the fact that, there are going to be more extreme weather events in New Zealand. We've got to stop treating them as one-off things and accept that with climate change, there are going to be more extreme weather events. So we've got to do more to mitigate climate change, and then we've got to do more to make sure that we're resilient and adaptable.
Would you ever take it to the South Island?
We've often taken our conferences to the South Island, yes, absolutely. I think 2024 we were in Christchurch.
What was your thinking around starting the second year in 2028, I believe? So the second year starting in 2028?
Yeah, it's a question of how we roll that out and how we pay for it, and obviously sequencing the costs.
In terms of the vibe of what has been said in the last few days, rhetorically, you're arguing that a lot is broken with New Zealand. People can't afford to live. There's not a lot left over at the end of the month. But in policy terms, it's quite conservative in terms of not a lot of new revenue, not a lot of new initiatives. Is there a mismatch between how wrong you're arguing the country is and your appetite to put bold, changey policy on the table to fix it?
Well, I remember when we announced the capital gains tax, the National Party confidently predicted that would be the end of the Labour Party because it was so big and so bold, and now they're complaining that we're not being bold enough. Then in reality, I think the policies that we're putting forward are credible, they're deliverable, and they're going to make a difference.
Are you slightly worried that you sort of fall into you've sort of answered this before, the Keir Starmer trap of saying that the country is pretty broken at the moment, but, if you wake up on November 8th as the likely Prime Minister, your appetite to put forward fundamental change to sort of respond to that mandate that you would have for changing the country is constrained by the relatively minor mandate you've argued for on the campaign trail?
No, look, I'm obviously not going to comment on what's happening in the UK at the moment. That would be very undiplomatic for me to do that. But what I set out in my speech is that we'll be campaigning on two prongs. One is some immediate cost of living relief, some immediate things that we can do that are going to make life easier for New Zealanders, help get Kiwis back into work, and a longer term plan to turn the economy around. And we actually, unlike this government, we actually do have a plan. They talk a lot about a plan, but New Zealanders haven't seen any evidence of that over the last 3 years.
So in the short term, at least, if voters sort of need to moderate their expectations about what is possible given the state of the economy and the state of the book.
Well, we'll set out what we can actually do in the short term, but also how we're going to turn the economy around in the longer term. So in the short term, there are things government can do that will make a real difference to Kiwis on the cost of living. Public transport fare caps, which can be introduced reasonably quickly, can make a huge difference to New Zealanders. Things like making it free to go and see the doctor and cutting the costs of healthcare, those are things that we can do that will make a difference. Getting people back to work. We can do some of those things, and we can do some of those reasonably quickly. Other things are going to take a bit longer.
To fair go.
Yeah.
How will Labour bring it back?
Look, Fair Go is a very iconic TV series. It used to be filmed in my electorate before all of New Zealand television moved up to Auckland. Those are programming decisions. Those are ultimately, maybe if National actually believed in public broadcasting, we might still have a Fair Go.
On transport, there's been a bit of reporting over the weekend about the national ticketing solution. Chris Bishop essentially criticising how the project was handled under Labour. What's your kind of reaction to that?
Well, my understanding is that the national ticketing program was actually set up by National. Look, I'd have to look into that, but I think that program actually predates our government. It's one that's been kicking around for quite a long time.
The contract was signed with Cubic in 2022.
Okay, look, I don't have all the details of it, so I'd have to have a look at it. All right, thanks very much, everyone. Cheers.